The flames of grief still burned on Earth after the loss of the convoy. Families cried for fathers who would never return, mothers who would never embrace their children again, and sons and daughters who had been swallowed by the cold silence of space. The first meeting with the galaxy had been humanity's dream for centuries. They had imagined friendship, cooperation, perhaps even guidance from wiser, older civilizations. But instead of friendship, they were met with destruction. Instead of guidance, they were shown contempt. The Zoltherian Empire had laughed at them. And laughter, mixed with blood, cuts deeper than any blade. At first, many leaders on Earth did not believe it. The message sent back by the survivors was filled with static, fear, and broken voices, but it was clear enough. We tried, they opened fire, no warning. The governments of Earth gathered in emergency councils. The colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter sent urgent calls for unity. For once in history, there were no arguments about borders, no divisions of nation against nation. Humanity felt the same wound together. For the first time in centuries, the human race stood as one. The Zoltherian Empire did not notice. To them, it had been a small act, a minor patrol swatting an insect. They recorded the destruction of the human convoy in their files, stamped it with insignificance, and moved on to greater matters. But for humanity, it was everything. The deaths of those men and women were not just numbers. They were family. They were explorers. They were symbols of hope. And when hope is killed, something darker rises in its place. News spread like wildfire across the colonies. On Mars, workers stopped their mining to listen to broadcasts. In orbiting stations, children clutched their parents' arms as the images of burning ships were replayed. On Earth, millions watched the skies in silence, realizing that humanity was not alone, and that the universe was dangerous. Fear filled their hearts at first. But fear slowly hardened into something else. Anger. Among the grieving was a captain named Elias Caro. His sister had been on the destroyed convoy, serving as a navigator. He watched the footage of the wreckage again and again until the images were burned into his memory. She wanted to see the stars, he whispered. And they took that from her. He was not the only one. Across every city and settlement, humans whispered vows of vengeance. Some prayed for justice. Others demanded war. But all agreed on one thing: humanity would not stay silent. The governments responded quickly. A fleet was ordered to be built, not for exploration, not for colonization, but for defense. Shipyards that once crafted vessels for trade now forged warships. Scientists who had studied space for curiosity now worked to create weapons strong enough to pierce alien shields. And the strangest thing happened: humanity learned quickly. They studied the fragments of wreckage left behind by the Imperial Patrol. They tore apart alien technology, examined every wire, every piece of metal, every spark of energy. What the Empire had built over centuries, humanity began to copy and improve in years. The Zoltherians had no idea that their act of cruelty had given humanity the very tools to rise. But while humans worked and prepared, the Empire struck again. This time, it was not a convoy. It was a colony. The world of New Horizon was young, filled with farms, rivers, and children who played under two suns. When the Empire arrived, the people of the colony thought they were saved. They thought perhaps this was the true first contact, perhaps this time there would be peace. But the Imperial soldiers laughed, just as their fleet commander had laughed before. They burned the fields. They shattered the towns. They took the young as slaves and left the rest in ashes. When the news reached Earth, the cries of sorrow turned into a roar of fury. The galaxy did not yet understand humanity. They thought humans were weak because they bled easily, because they mourned loudly, because they felt pain so deeply. But what the galaxy did not know was that it was those very wounds that made humanity dangerous. Every human death was remembered. Every attack became a lesson. Every injustice planted a seed of vengeance. The Empire thought they were teaching humanity fear. But in truth, they were teaching humanity how to fight. On Earth, leaders gave speeches that echoed through the ages. "They believe we are weak," one said. "They believe we are prey. But let the galaxy hear this: humanity does not bow. Humanity does not break. We will endure. And when we rise, we will not forgive." In every city, people cheered through their tears. Soldiers volunteered in numbers greater than ever before. Engineers worked without rest. Children drew pictures of starships with fire in their engines and banners that carried Earth's flag. The grief of humanity had become a storm. Meanwhile, in the throne world of the Zoltherian Empire, the Emperor heard the reports of his patrols. The humans had protested, resisted, even dared to fight back. "Pathetic," he said with a smirk. "They are nothing. Crush them again if they resist." And with a wave of his hand, he dismissed humanity as if they were an insect. But insects, when cornered, bite. The Zoltherian Empire did not yet know it, but their laughter had already sealed their fate. By treating humanity with contempt, they had awakened something far greater than they could imagine. Because in the dark silence of space, where ashes drifted from burned colonies, humanity whispered one promise. "We will never forget. We will never forgive." The first encounter was not friendship. It was fire. It was blood. And it was the moment humanity's destiny changed forever. The galaxy would remember this day. The day the Empire made its greatest mistake. The galaxy was old. Stars had lived and died for billions of years, and civilizations had risen and fallen in that endless span of time. At the very heart of it stood the Zoltherian Empire, a power so vast and ancient that it seemed eternal. Worlds bowed to it, fleets swore loyalty, and entire species bent their knees in fear. The Empire's banners stretched across 1,000 suns, its rule enforced by ships that blotted out the skies. To them, lesser races were nothing more than dust. Some were enslaved. Some were wiped out. Others were simply ignored, considered too small, too weak, too primitive to matter. And among those forgotten was a small blue planet circling an average yellow star, Earth. For the Empire, Earth was nothing. It was a backwater, hidden at the edge of a spiral arm, filled with a species that had barely touched the stars. They were not worth conquering. They were not worth enslaving. The Zoltherians did not even bother to record their name properly in their grand archives. At most, they dismissed them as the humans. But what the Empire forgot was that sometimes the smallest sparks become the fiercest flames. Humanity had always been a strange species. On Earth, they had fought themselves for centuries. Kingdoms rose and fell. Empires were built in blood and then crumbled into dust. And yet, through every war, through every disaster, one thing remained, the will to endure. When the oceans rose, humans built ships. When the skies darkened, they made fire. When plague spread, they searched for cures. And when the world tore itself apart with weapons of fire, humanity still found a way to climb back, scarred but alive. It was suffering that made them strong. It was loss that shaped their hearts. And it was hope that kept them moving forward, step by step, toward the stars. By the time the Zoltherian Empire noticed them, humanity had already spread to its nearby worlds. The Moon, Mars, and the scattered colonies across their system held thriving cities. They were still small compared to the vast civilizations of the galaxy, but they dreamed big. To the humans, space was not just an empty void. It was freedom. It was destiny. Every rocket launched from Earth carried not only technology, but also the spirit of millions who refused to be trapped on one fragile planet. They named their ships after their heroes, their dreams, their hopes. Endeavor. Dauntless. Spirit. Hope. Words that carried meaning, words that reminded them of who they were. And though their ships were weaker than those of the great empires, they were built with determination. For a time, humanity believed they were alone. The stars were silent, and the galaxy seemed endless. But humans were not a species that feared silence. They filled it with stories, with songs, with the laughter of children on colony worlds. They carried Earth's oceans, forests, and skies with them in memory and in spirit, never forgetting where they came from. They did not know that beyond their reach, thousands of alien eyes watched. They did not know that in the shadows of the galaxy, the Zoltherian Empire already decided their fate. To the Empire, humanity was not a mystery worth solving. They were just another young race, one of countless that would either serve or vanish. Yet, something about humanity was different. While other species submitted easily to the Empire, humans carried within them a dangerous flame. They were stubborn. They were restless. They refused to stay broken. Unlike many alien civilizations that had one culture, one belief, or one way of life, humanity was a storm of differences, nations, languages, faiths, dreams. And it was that chaos, that endless variety, that gave them strength. Because when disaster struck, some of them always stood back up. When one group fell, another rose. They had learned to rebuild 1,000 times before ever touching the stars. That was something the Empire could never understand. On Earth, people still looked at the night sky with wonder. Children pointed at the constellations, asking about the worlds that might exist there. Scientists dreamed of first contact, of finding friends among the stars. Writers imagined stories of peace, of war, of strange new civilizations waiting to be discovered. There was excitement. There was hope. Humanity wanted to believe that when they finally met others, it would be a moment of unity and understanding. They wanted to believe the galaxy was full of voices waiting to greet them. But reality was far colder. The galaxy was ruled not by kindness, but by cruelty. And the first voice humanity would hear was not one of welcome, but of domination. The first encounter came suddenly. A human trade convoy, carrying minerals from the asteroid belt, stumbled upon an Imperial patrol ship. At first, the humans thought it was a miracle. They sent messages, desperate to establish contact, to share language, to reach across the void with peace. But the reply that came was not friendship. It was laughter. To the Zoltherian commander, the fragile human ships were toys. Their weapons were outdated, their shields weak. He sneered at their attempts at communication. To him, humans were insects buzzing in the dark. And in the way of the Empire, insects were crushed. The Imperial fleet opened fire. In minutes, the convoy was destroyed. Hundreds of lives burned away in the cold silence of space. Families waiting back on Earth never saw their loved ones again. The humans' first message to the galaxy was one of peace. The galaxy's answer was death. And so, humanity learned the truth. The universe was not kind. The universe was not waiting with open arms. It was cruel, harsh, and merciless. And the so-called rulers of the stars cared nothing for them. Earth wept. Colonies mourned. But beneath that grief, something older stirred, something that had always lived in the human heart. A quiet, burning rage. The Zoltherian Empire had made a choice. They had chosen to treat humanity as prey. But humanity was not prey. Not anymore. This was the beginning. The beginning of the Empire's greatest mistake. The fire of war had been lit, though humanity was still unprepared for the scale of the storm that was coming. The Zoltherian Empire had decided that the humans were not simply insects, they were disobedient insects. And disobedience, in the eyes of the Empire, was punished with cruelty beyond imagination. The second wave came swiftly. It was not a small patrol this time, nor a single raiding ship. It was a fleet. Sleek alien vessels, dark and sharp, cut across the void like blades of night. Their engines glowed with power that dwarfed human technology. Their weapons could turn cities into ash in seconds. And their orders were simple: burn the humans until they kneel. The first target was the colony of Eden's Reach. It was a peaceful place, filled with farmers and builders who had left Earth to start anew among the stars. The people there had dreamed of a world free from old wars, a place where children could grow under alien skies. But when the Empire came, those dreams turned to screams. The Imperial fleet descended without warning. Human defenses were shattered within minutes. Shields flickered and died, and the colony's small guard ships were torn apart like paper. Cities were bombed from orbit, towers of smoke rising where homes had once stood. Children hid in basements as the sky turned red. Families clutched one another, praying to be spared. But the Empire had no mercy. To them, destruction was not only strategy, it was entertainment. When news of Eden's Reach reached Earth, the sorrow was unbearable. Families screamed in grief. The names of the dead scrolled endlessly on screens. For days, people walked in silence, mourning the loss of so many innocent lives. But sorrow was not the only response. Every death became a reason to fight. Every ruined world became a reminder of what was at stake. The Empire thought humanity would break. Instead, humanity began to harden. On Mars, factories that once built mining equipment now built weapons. Engineers who had studied physics for exploration now applied it to war. New ships rose from shipyards, smaller than the Empire's giants, but faster, more adaptable, and filled with human ingenuity. The military began training soldiers not just to defend, but to strike back. They studied every scrap of alien wreckage, every weapon fragment, every piece of data. Humanity learned quickly, far more quickly than the Empire expected. The pain of loss had turned into determination. But the Empire was not finished. They struck again and again, each attack a message to the rest of the galaxy. On Aurelia Station, humans tried to negotiate, sending envoys to beg for peace. The Zoltherian commander laughed in their faces and had them executed before broadcasting it to the station's people. On Lunar Colony, they destroyed entire research domes, leaving nothing but frozen corpses in the airless night. On Titan, they enslaved thousands, chaining them in the holds of their ships, to be sold in markets light years away. The galaxy watched in silence. Other species saw the humans suffering but dared not speak. They had seen what happened to those who defied the Empire. For centuries, they had bowed their heads in fear, and they would not risk defiance. But even in silence, whispers began to spread. The humans fight back. The humans do not surrender. The humans are different. Humanity's rage grew. No longer was this only about survival. It had become personal. The faces of the dead filled every home. The images of enslaved children haunted every parent. Humanity no longer spoke of peace. They spoke of vengeance. Captain Elias Caro, now commanding one of the first human war fleets, gave a speech that echoed across every colony. They believe we will kneel. They believe we will break. But let the galaxy hear this: humanity has never bowed, and we never will. For every world they burn, we will build ships. For every life they take, we will return fire. We will rise, and we will make them regret the day they touched our skies. The people cheered through their tears. And in that moment, the human spirit was no longer fractured. It was one. The Empire, arrogant as ever, dismissed humanity's resistance. To them, the small victories of humans were accidents, the sparks of a primitive race struggling against inevitability. They are nothing, the Emperor declared from his throne. Crush them again. Break them until their spirit is dust. But the Emperor did not understand. Spirit cannot be crushed so easily. Not human spirit. The more the Empire struck, the more humans united. The more humans lost, the harder they fought. The more they bled, the more dangerous they became. And soon, the Empire would learn the truth. Humanity was not like the other enslaved species. They did not surrender, even when hope seemed gone. They did not forget, even when the fires of grief burned their hearts. And most of all, they did not forgive. The Empire believed they were teaching humanity fear. Instead, they were teaching humanity how to hate. By the end of that year, the skies above Earth were filled with new ships. Their hulls were marked with names of defiance: Vengeance, Liberty, Dawnfire, Unbroken. Children pointed at the stars and whispered, "That is where our fathers and mothers are fighting." And in the shadows of the galaxy, the enslaved races began to watch more closely. For centuries, they had known nothing but despair. But now, a small, fragile species was standing against the monster that ruled them all. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, it was happening. The Zoltherian Empire thought they were crushing insects. But in truth, they were awakening lions. And the lions were hungry. This was no longer just survival. This was the beginning of humanity's wrath. The galaxy thought it was impossible. The Zoltherian Empire had ruled for thousands of years, their fleets unbeaten, their name feared like a shadow across the stars. No one challenged them. No one dared. But then came humanity. They were still young, still small compared to the great empires. Their fleets were fewer, their weapons weaker. Yet their hearts burned with something the Empire had forgotten long ago: the will to fight, no matter the cost. The chance for change came on the colony world of Ars Prime. It was a rich, red world filled with iron mountains and deep valleys. For years, it had supplied resources to Earth's growing fleet. The Empire saw it as a ripe target to crush human morale. If Ars Prime fell, Earth's dream of resistance would collapse with it. The Zoltherian fleet that arrived was massive, over 100 warships, sleek and deadly, their hulls glowing with alien fire. The people of Ars Prime looked to the sky in despair. How could their fragile defenses survive such a storm? But this time, things were different. Waiting for the Empire above Ars Prime was the first true human fleet. The human ships were smaller, yes, but they were fast. Their armor was rough but strong. Their weapons were new, designed by sleepless scientists who had poured every ounce of their grief and genius into the task. Among them was the flagship Unbroken, commanded by Captain Elias Caro, whose sister had died in the first encounter. His voice was calm, but his eyes were fire. "They think we are prey," he told his crew as the Empire approached. "They believe we will bow. Today, we show them what it means to face humanity." His words were carried across every ship. Every pilot, every soldier, every engineer heard them. And their hearts hardened with the same fire. The battle began with thunder. Imperial cannons lit the sky, energy beams slamming into human shields. Smaller human ships dodged and weaved, striking back with missiles and railguns that pierced through weak points in the alien hulls. The humans had studied their enemy carefully, and now that knowledge became their weapon. For the first time, the Empire was shocked. They expected an easy slaughter, but the humans moved like wolves. Their fleets were not rigid and slow like the Empire's. They adapted, shifted, and struck with cunning. A swarm of smaller ships surrounded a single Imperial cruiser, tearing it apart piece by piece until it exploded in a brilliant fireball. The slaves of the galaxy, watching from hidden channels, gasped in disbelief. An Imperial ship had fallen, to humans. The battle raged for hours. Human ships burned, but they refused to retreat. Pilots fought even as their hulls cracked, whispering last messages to their families before ramming their ships into enemy cruisers, sacrificing themselves to take the enemy down. On the bridge of Unbroken, Elias Caro gave his command with steel in his voice. Target their command ship. The human fleet shifted, focusing all their firepower on the Imperial flagship. It was larger than any human vessel, bristling with weapons. For centuries, such ships had crushed rebellions across the stars. No one had ever brought one down. But humanity did not know the word impossible. Wave after wave of missiles and railgun fire hammered into the alien flagship. Its shields flickered, sparks spilling into the void. The humans pressed harder, refusing to stop. And then, with a final roar of weapons, the great Imperial flagship cracked open and exploded in flames. The galaxy held its breath. The impossible had happened. Humanity, the so-called forgotten species, had destroyed an Imperial flagship. The rest of the Imperial fleet faltered. Some fought on, but the humans smelled blood. They struck with everything they had, chasing the enemy down, ship by ship. The hunters had become the hunted. By the end of the battle, Ars Prime still stood. And the human fleet, scarred, blooded, but victorious, watched as the surviving Imperial ships fled into the darkness. Cheers erupted across every colony. On Mars, people filled the streets, waving banners. On Earth, children danced as the news spread. For the first time since the war had begun, there was hope. The enslaved races of the galaxy whispered louder now. The humans won. They broke an Imperial fleet. Perhaps the Empire is not invincible. The seeds of rebellion began to stir in hearts that had been silent for centuries. Captain Elias Caro stood on the bridge of Unbroken, watching the burning wreckage drift among the stars. His crew cheered, but his eyes were wet with tears. He thought of his sister, lost in the first battle. He thought of the children of New Horizon, stolen into slavery. He thought of Eden's Reach, reduced to ash. This victory is for them, he whispered. And then, louder so all could hear. This is only the beginning. Today, we showed the Empire we will not bow. Tomorrow, we will show them we will not stop. The Zoltherian Empire, for the first time in its long history, felt something it had not felt in centuries. Fear. They had underestimated humanity. They had treated them as insects. But now they saw the truth. Humans were something else. Something dangerous. Something unstoppable once roused. And though the Empire still laughed publicly, though their emperor dismissed the humans as a minor annoyance, deep inside their high council, whispers began. What if we made a mistake? The first victory of humanity was more than a battle won. It was a message. The galaxy now knew that humans were not prey. They were predators. And the Empire had awakened them. The victory at Ars Prime spread through the stars like wildfire. For centuries, the Zoltherian Empire had been untouchable. Their fleets had crushed rebellions before they even began. Their name alone had been enough to silence resistance. But now, a new name was whispered in the galaxy, humanity. Every enslaved world heard the news. In hidden caves, in chained labor camps, in dark mines beneath alien suns, the story spread. The humans fought back. The humans defeated the Empire. The humans are not afraid. For the first time in generations, the oppressed dared to hope. Humanity, however, was not celebrating quietly. They were preparing. The victory at Ars Prime had cost them dearly. Many ships had been lost. Thousands of soldiers had given their lives. But instead of breaking their spirit, the losses only fueled their determination. Shipyards on Mars worked without rest, metal ringing day and night. On Earth, every scientist, every engineer, every inventor poured their souls into building new weapons. Children wrote letters to soldiers, promising they would grow strong to join the fight. Families placed pictures of lost loved ones on walls, whispering to them, "We will avenge you." The humans were no longer only defending. They were hunting. Their attacks began swiftly. A small fleet of human warships struck an Imperial supply line near the Perseus Arm. The aliens laughed at first, thinking they faced another rebellion doomed to fail. But the humans fought like fire. They moved unpredictably, striking weak points, retreating, then striking again. Within hours, the Imperial supply ships were in flames, their escorts destroyed. Then came another attack, this time deep in Imperial territory. Human forces raided a slave market, freeing thousands of alien captives. Those who had known nothing but chains fell to their knees, tears streaming down their faces, as humans lifted them up and said, "You are free." For the galaxy, it was unthinkable. No one had dared to attack the Empire in its own heartlands. No one had dared to free slaves under its gaze. But the humans did. The Empire began calling them demons. They said humanity was reckless, merciless, dangerous. And perhaps they were right. Human ships appeared where no fleet should be. They struck and vanished, leaving wreckage behind. Every battle scarred the Empire, and every scar was a reminder that humanity could not be broken. The Emperor, furious, declared that humans would be hunted until none remained. "We will burn their home," he roared, "and scatter their ashes into the void." But every threat only made humanity stronger. On the colonies, the people no longer lived in fear. They lived with fire. Posters showed human soldiers standing against alien giants. Speeches filled the airwaves, reminding people of their strength. One soldier, before leaving for battle, told his daughter, "Remember this, child. If they burn one of us, we rise 100 stronger. Do not cry for me if I fall. Stand tall. Because we are human, and we do not kneel." These words were repeated across the stars, becoming a promise on every human tongue. But humanity's wrath was not only in words. It was in action. At the Battle of Vera's Gate, a human fleet ambushed an Imperial armada twice its size. They fought with cunning, using asteroid fields as cover, tricking the enemy into traps. When the dust settled, the Imperial fleet was in ruins, and the humans had taken another step deeper into enemy space. At the raid of Solith, human marines stormed an Imperial fortress. They fought hand to hand, their eyes burning with rage, their battle cries echoing through the halls. Prisoners were freed, banners of the Empire torn down, and for the first time in centuries, the fortress walls heard the sound of freedom. The galaxy was no longer silent. Rebellions began to spark. Small at first, but growing. Species long enslaved looked at the humans and whispered, "If they can fight, so can we." The Empire laughed still, but their laughter was strained. Their fleets were stretched thin. Their pride was wounded. And behind their arrogance, fear was growing. Because they realized something terrible, humans were learning faster than anyone expected. In only a few years, humanity had gone from fragile explorers to warriors who could challenge the greatest power in the galaxy. They were not just fighting. They were evolving. The Empire began to ask themselves, what happens if this continues? What happens if humanity grows stronger still? Captain Elias Caro, now a legend among his people, stood at the helm of Unbroken as another enemy fleet retreated. His crew cheered, but his heart remained heavy. He knew the price of every victory, the faces of the fallen haunted him. Yet he also knew the truth, there was no turning back. "We will fight," he told his officers, his voice steady, "until the Empire falls, or until humanity is gone. We did not choose this war, but we will end it." His words spread, carried from ship to ship, world to world. And everywhere they were heard, they became a vow. The wrath of humanity had been unleashed. And the galaxy trembled. The Zoltherian Empire had suffered losses it had never imagined. Fleets had been broken, fortresses burned, and whispers of rebellion spread like sparks in dry grass. Everywhere the Empire looked, the name of humanity echoed like thunder. The Emperor's pride could no longer bear it. His council begged him to be cautious, to measure his response, but arrogance blinded him. He wanted to end humanity once and for all, not with another battle, but with a single strike so devastating that no race would ever dare follow their example. And so, he gave the order. The target was Earth. The humans had fought across colonies and distant battlefields, but Earth was more than a world. It was home. It was history. It was where every song, every dream, every tear of humanity had begun. To strike Earth was to strike the very heart of their soul. The Imperial fleet came in silence, cloaked in the darkness of space. It was not an invasion fleet. It was a weapon. At its center was a colossal ship carrying the Empire's most feared device, a world killer. It was a weapon designed not to conquer, but to erase. When the alarm was raised, it was already too late. The skies above Earth burned as the weapon fired. A beam of unimaginable power struck the oceans first, turning them to steam. Cities were torn apart, their towers crumbling into dust. Forests, mountains, rivers, all were consumed in fire. Billions cried out as the ground shook and the air turned to ash. In space, human fleets scrambled to respond, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Brave pilots charged into the enemy lines, their ships shattering like glass against the might of the Empire. They fought not to win, but to buy seconds of time for those below. But seconds were not enough. Earth screamed. Children clung to their parents as firestorms swept through their cities. Families huddled together, whispering prayers into the choking air. Soldiers fought on the ground, knowing their weapons were useless against the sky itself. And then, silence. When the flames died, Earth was broken. Oceans boiled away, continents scarred, cities reduced to rubble. Billions were dead. The cradle of humanity had become a graveyard. The Zoltherian fleet left without looking back, leaving only smoke and ruin behind them. Across the colonies, news of Earth's destruction spread. At first, there was disbelief. People shook their heads, refusing to accept it. Earth cannot fall. Not Earth. But the images soon arrived, the blackened skies, the shattered cities, the oceans of ash. And denial turned to grief. On Mars, thousands filled the streets, screaming their rage into the heavens. On Mars Prime, soldiers swore oaths of vengeance with tears streaming down their faces. In the distant outposts, people wept silently, staring at the stars where their home once shone bright. It was the darkest day in human history. But in that darkness, something terrible was born. The grief of humanity twisted into fury. If before they had fought to survive, now they fought to avenge. No voice spoke of peace anymore. No hand reached for compromise. Humanity's heart had been scarred beyond healing. The word spread like wildfire. No human will rest. No human will forgive. We will not stop until the Empire is ash. Captain Elias Carrow stood on the bridge of Unbroken, staring at the broken world on his screen. His crew waited in silence, their faces pale, their eyes red with grief. "My sister died in the first attack," Elias said, his voice low. "I thought I understood loss then. But this is beyond loss. This is an insult to every human who ever lived, to every dream we ever had." He raised his head, and his eyes burned with fire. From this moment, there will be no retreat. No surrender. No mercy. The Empire wanted war. We will give them a war so fierce, the stars themselves will remember. The crew roared their approval, their tears now replaced with rage. Humanity changed after that day. Factories no longer worked just to build ships, they worked to build weapons of vengeance. Scientists no longer asked if something could be done, they asked only how fast. Soldiers no longer fought for survival, they fought for justice, for revenge, for the billions of voices that had been silenced on Earth. Every child born after that day was raised with the memory of a burned world. Every parent whispered to them, "Remember Earth. Remember who we lost. Fight for them." The destruction of Earth did not end humanity. It bound them together in a way nothing else ever could. The Emperor believed he had broken them. But he had only awakened them. For from the ashes of Earth rose a fire the galaxy had never seen before, a wrath so pure, so unstoppable, that it would burn across every star. Humanity had been patient once. They had been merciful once. But not anymore. Now, they would fight until the Empire was nothing but dust. The galaxy trembled as the news spread. Some races mourned in silence. Others, long enslaved, raised their heads and whispered, "If humanity can endure this, then so can we." The Empire had meant to send a message of fear. Instead, they had sent a message of defiance. Because the humans, scarred and grieving, now carried a vow in their hearts. Earth will never be forgotten. And the Empire will never be forgiven. The turning point had come. This war was no longer about survival. This was vengeance. This was wrath. The galaxy had changed. Where once the Zoltherian Empire stood unchallenged, cracks now spread through its walls. The destruction of Earth had not ended humanity, it had set them free from doubt, from fear, from hesitation. Human fleets, forged in grief and fire, began to strike back. They no longer fought cautiously. They attacked with a fury that terrified even those who had never known fear before. Every battle was no longer just strategy, it was vengeance. The first target was Vorak Prime, one of the Empire's greatest shipyards. For centuries, it had been a symbol of imperial pride, where endless fleets were born. The Zoltherian lords believed no force could touch it. They were wrong. The human fleet arrived without warning. Hundreds of ships, dark as shadows, fell upon the shipyard like wolves among sheep. The defenders fought bravely, but the rage of humanity was a storm they could not withstand. Explosions lit the skies, and massive half-built warships collapsed into the flames. Workers fled in terror as human marines stormed the docks, planting charges that tore the yards apart. When it was over, Vorik Prime was no more. Where once ships had been built for conquest, now only twisted wreckage floated in the void. And humanity left a message carved into the ruins. For Earth. From world to world, the pattern repeated. The humans struck slave camps, freeing races that had suffered in silence for generations. They burned supply depots, shattered communication hubs, and erased fortress after fortress. Each time, the survivors whispered the same words. They fight like no other. To the enslaved, humanity became a beacon of hope. To the Empire, they became a nightmare. On one distant moon, Commander Rear Solin stood among newly freed aliens. They had once bowed to the Empire, beaten into obedience. Now they looked at the human soldiers with wide eyes full of disbelief. "Why?" one alien asked, his voice shaking. "Why risk your lives for us? The Empire kills anyone who resists. You should fight only for yourselves." Rear's eyes burned with quiet fire as she answered. "Because we know what it is to lose everything. Because no one deserves chains. And because the Empire made the mistake of teaching us what true pain feels like. Now we will make sure no one else suffers as we did." The aliens fell silent. And then, slowly, one by one, they knelt. Not in fear, but in loyalty. Humanity was no longer alone. The Emperor, furious at the spread of rebellion, unleashed more fleets. He demanded his admirals crush humanity before the fire spread further. But it was too late. Every battle cost the Empire dearly. Every victory of humanity inspired another race to rise. The once mighty armadas of the Zoltherian found themselves stretched thin, bleeding across 100 fronts. And worse, the humans fought differently. They did not march like the Empire. They did not obey the same rules. They struck from the shadows, hit supply lines, turned allies into enemies. They made the Empire bleed slowly, painfully, like a predator wearing down its prey. Captain Elias Caro stood in the command chamber of Unbroken, surrounded by holographic maps of the galaxy. Red marks showed the Empire's strength, but each week, more of those marks turned black, erased by human strikes. "They thought we were weak," Elias said softly. "They thought destroying Earth would break us. But every world we burn, every prison we shatter, every ship we sink, it is Earth's voice speaking through us." He turned to his crew, his face grim but proud. "And we will not stop. Not until the Emperor kneels in the ashes of his own empire." His words became the heartbeat of humanity's war. But even in victory, grief followed. Every battle cost lives. Human soldiers died in the thousands, their bodies drifting among the stars. Mothers wept over empty cradles, lovers whispered to pictures of those who would never return. Humanity's wrath was mighty, but it was not without pain. Yet the pain only fed the fire. Each loss reminded them why they fought. Each death was another voice crying for justice. The galaxy soon understood, this was no ordinary war. This was vengeance carried by an entire species. One by one, the oppressed races began to rise. The Cairn, once beaten into slavery, shattered their chains and took up arms. The Veari, whose wings had been clipped by the Empire, soared into battle alongside human fighters. Entire fleets that once served the Emperor turned their guns against him, inspired by humanity's defiance. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Empire trembled. The Emperor sat in his throne, his claws digging into the armrests as news after news reached him. Shipyards burned. Worlds lost. Slaves revolting. And always, always, the same cursed words. For Earth. He slammed his fist into the throne, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Then I will show them wrath. I will drown them in fire greater than anything they have ever known." But deep within, fear coiled like a shadow. He had unleashed something he could no longer control. Humanity's war cry now thundered across the stars. They were not the largest fleet. They were not the oldest race. But they were something greater, united, unbroken, fueled by grief and vengeance. Every soldier carried Earth in their heart. Every ship bore the names of the fallen. Every battle was fought not for land, not for conquest, but for memory, for justice, for the billions who had been silenced. The galaxy had never seen such fury. And it was only the beginning. The war had reached its peak. For months, humanity had struck the Empire again and again, tearing away its fleets, its worlds, and its pride. What began as vengeance for Earth had become something greater, a storm that no wall could hold back. Now, only one target remained. The throne world of the Zoltherian Empire. A planet of towering spires and endless defenses, guarded by the greatest armada the galaxy had ever seen. For 10,000 years, it had never been touched by enemy hands. To the Empire, it was eternal. To humanity, it was the heart of their enemy. And they were coming for it. The human fleet gathered in the blackness of space, thousands of ships standing ready. Each vessel bore scars of countless battles. Some hulls were broken and patched, others carried names painted in white, the names of the fallen. On the command deck of Unbroken, Captain Elias Caro looked upon the gathered armada. His voice was quiet, but it carried strength. Today, we end this. Not for conquest, not for glory, but for Earth, and for every soul the Empire has crushed beneath its boot. Let the galaxy remember that humanity does not forgive, and humanity does not fall. A whisper moved through the fleet as the word spread. And then, in unison, across 1,000 ships, came the same cry. For Earth. The battle began like thunder. The Emperor's armada rose from orbit, a wall of warships larger than anything humanity had ever faced. Their weapons lit the void, turning darkness into fire. But the humans did not retreat. They charged. Like a tide of vengeance, they crashed into the enemy lines. Fighters screamed between the stars, bombers pierced through shields, and human warships rammed into enemy cruisers with fearless fury. Every explosion was another heartbeat of vengeance. The battle was chaos, flames, steel, and death mixing in every corner of the sky. Yet through it all, the humans pressed forward, step by bloody step, toward the throne world below. On the surface, the Emperor watched from his throne. His face twisted with rage as his armada faltered. "They are insects," he roared. "Insects cannot bring down a god." But even as he spoke, reports flooded in, his fleets falling, his fortresses shattered, his people in panic. The unthinkable had happened. The Empire was losing. At last, humanity broke through. Dropships pierced the planet's defenses, landing in waves upon the golden capital. Human soldiers poured into the streets, their banners held high, their cries shaking the air. The alien citizens watched in silence. Many were once slaves, once broken. Now they looked upon humanity not with fear, but with awe. For the first time, they saw the Empire bleed. Commander Rear Solin led the charge into the palace itself. The great halls of the Emperor shook with the sound of gunfire and explosions. The golden walls, once symbols of eternal power, now crumbled beneath the weight of war. At last, the doors to the throne room burst open. There sat the Emperor, massive and terrible, his eyes burning with fury. Around him, his guards fell one by one, until only he remained. "You dare," the Emperor hissed, rising from his throne. "You think your kind can rule where gods have stood?" Rhea stepped forward, her weapon raised, her voice steady. "No. We do not want to rule. We came for justice. We came for Earth." The duel was swift and brutal. The Emperor was strong, but rage had blinded him. The humans fought with precision, with unity, with a fire he could not understand. At last, Elias himself struck the final blow. The Emperor staggered, his voice breaking into disbelief. This was not meant to be. And then the ruler of 10,000 years fell. The throne room went silent. For the first time in history, the Empire was without its master. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. The Emperor was dead. His palace had fallen. Humanity had won. The galaxy trembled, not in fear, but in hope. The enslaved cheered. The oppressed raised their heads. Chains shattered not by words, but by the example of a single species that refused to bow. Humanity had done what none before had dared. They had risen from ashes and torn down an empire. On the ruins of the palace, a human flag was raised. It was simple, white and blue, marked with the memory of Earth. Beneath it stood Elias, Rhea, and the surviving soldiers, their faces scarred but unbroken. "This is not conquest," Elias declared to the galaxy. "This is justice. Humanity does not seek thrones. We seek freedom, for ourselves, and for all who were broken by this empire." And across the stars, billions heard his words. The war was over, but its scars would remain forever. Earth was gone, yet in a way, Earth lived on, inside every human heart, inside every act of defiance, inside every victory carved from pain. Humanity had become something new. No longer the youngest race, no longer fragile and ignored. They were a force the galaxy would never forget. The Empire's greatest mistake had not been destroying Earth. It had been awakening humanity's wrath. And in the silence that followed the fall, one truth burned brighter than all the stars. Humanity endures.